And so I want to welcome you all. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this side event on the EU Drug Strategy 21-25. Thank you for attending. Let me just briefly refer some technical information related to our event. So the microphones and cameras are switched off. After all the presentations, we will have some minutes, I hope, for questions. You can ask questions orally by clicking on the icon Raise Hand next to your name. To view your name, you must first activate the participants icon located at the bottom right of your screen. You can also ask questions by written message through the chat. I also want to inform you that this event will be recorded. I hope that nobody opposes to that. Well, then let's move. Portugal, in its capacity of presidency of the Council of the European Union, is very honored to host this side event together with Germany, the European Commission, Europol, and the MCDDA. This side event is particularly important because it will allow us to touch upon the new political framework and priorities for the EU's drug policy in the period 21-25, which was adopted last December during the rotating German presidency of the Council of the European Union. The strategy complements national policies, and its main objective is to ensure a high level of health protection, social stability and security, as well as contribute to awareness raising. With this new strategic document, the EU and its member states reaffirm their commitment to an approach which is balanced between drug supply reduction and drug demand reduction, based on the evidence of what works and what does not work in terms of policy and measures, promoting the participation and the involvement of civil society and grounded in the respect for human rights, gender equality, and health equity. At the same time, the strategy uses the lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis and takes a future-oriented approach, promoting research, innovation, and foresight to respond more effectively to increasing challenges and to anticipate them. I now invite you all to watch a short video on the EU Drug Strategy 21-25. You can find on the chat a link to this video as well. I hope that it works. Let's try. the Council Secretariat for preparing this video. As I said, you can find a link, or I don't know if it is already available, but it will be a link to this video on the chat. Well, and with no further delays, I give now the floor to our German colleague, Markus Rill, representing the outgoing German presidency of the Council of the EU, to briefly share with us the key elements of the EU drug strategy 21-25. Markus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We will share our small presentation, which will go with my words. I hope everybody will see that. Yeah. Mr. Chair, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union for giving me the opportunity to participate in this CND side event today. It's really an honor for me to speak to all of you on behalf of Germany. As already pointed out by the Portuguese presidency, the EU drug strategy 2021 to 2025 of the European Union was adopted by the Council of the European Union in the end of last year, exactly on 18th of December, under the outgoing German presidency of the European Union. We had the presidency in the second semester of 2020. This strategy, ladies and gentlemen, sets out the political framework and the priorities of the drug policy in the European Union and in its member states during the next 5 years. At this point, I would like to stress that the European Union and its member states reaffirm their very important commitment to an evidence-based, comprehensive and balanced approach in the drug policy that was already mentioned by the chair, and which is very important, with the preservation of human rights at its core. I now like to give you an overview on the key elements of the strategy. The new strategy consists of 3 policy areas and 3 cross-cutting themes in order to support the 3 policy areas. Around these areas and themes, the strategy encompasses 11 strategic priorities. Let me start with the first policy area, which is called drug supply reduction / enhanced security. With this policy area, the strategy targets all aspects of the illicit drug market and includes the prevention of, the dissuasion from, and the disruption of related crime, in particular organized crime. And this has to be done through judicial and law enforcement cooperation, intelligence, interdiction, confiscation of criminal assets, investigations, and border management. This priority area, ladies and gentlemen, has been further enhanced as compared to the previous EU strategy, which was dedicated for the period of 7 years. Now we have a strategy for 5 years. This is done in order to respond to the challenging developments in European drug markets. These challenging developments in the European drug markets are characterized by nowadays and the last years high availability of various types of drugs, illicit drugs, ever larger seizures, increasing use of violence, which is a very bad phenomenon, and huge profits, as well as the use of social media platforms for the ones who traffic, apps and the internet and darknet for illicit drug trafficking. Such features have not faded during the COVID-19 crisis. To the contrary, I would have been happy to tell you something else. The second policy area, which is called drug demand reduction, consists of a range of mutually reinforcing measures, including prevention, early detection and intervention, counseling, treatment, rehabilitation, social reintegration and recovery. Priorities and actions in the policy area drug demand reduction need to be A, appropriate to the local social context and to the needs of the targeted population. B, based on scientific evidence. C, safe and effective, and last but not least, developed through the close collaboration of a number of health and social support services. At the same time, it is important for the European Union to stress the fact that the COVID-19 crisis has further revealed the need to ensure continuity of priorities and actions in the policy area drug demand reduction. At the third and very important policy area in the drugs strategy of the European Union, a new chapter has been dedicated, and all 27 member states of the EU are proud that we succeeded in that. This third policy area is called addressing drug-related harm. Everybody knows about the different views on accepting drug-related harm in international context. This is highly relevant for the European Union that we took this new third chapter. This policy area includes measures and policies to prevent or to reduce the possible health and social risk and harm for people who use drugs. We in the EU, we are not likely to say abuse, we like to say use drugs for society and, what is very important, in prison settings as well. The chapter harm reduction covers aspects such as reducing the prevalence and incidence of drug-related infectious diseases, preventing overdoses and drug-related deaths, and providing alternative to coercive sanctions. The strategy also identifies the following three cross-cutting themes in supporting the above-mentioned three policy areas. The first cross-cutting theme is dedicated to international cooperation, which is in the field of multilateralism, which we believe in the EU on very important. The objective of this cross-cutting theme is to enhance the role of the European Union as a broker for a people-centered and human rights-orientated drug policy through cooperation with third countries, regions, and for sure international organizations, as well as what I like to highlight in this context with our partners from civil society. This while strengthening the commitment to development-oriented drug policies and alternative development measures. Second cross-cutting theme deals with research, innovation, and foresight. By this, the European Union and its member states shall be provided with the necessary comprehensive research and foresight capacities to address drug challenges in a more agile and proactive manner, increasing preparedness to respond to future challenges. That's one of the lessons we learned on the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The third cross-cutting theme is dedicated to coordination, governance, and implementation in order to ensure optimal implementation of the European drug strategy, including via the key action of the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drugs Addiction. The director is with us today, and of Europol. A representative of Europol is as well with us today. And this should be done by involving as well our partners from civil society and by providing adequate resources at European Union and national level to achieve this. Mr. Chair, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I hereby conclude my brief presentation to inform you. The text of the new drug strategy has been published in the official journal of the European Union, and as my dear colleague, the chair, already mentioned, the text of the strategy is available in all languages of the European Union, and the text can be downloaded by using the click box named Link to the Strategy, which is provided in the electronic leaflet for this side event. With a view to the limited time available today, we will be happy to answer any questions at a later stage. Thank you for your attention, and I'd like to give back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for this very comprehensive presentation. We know that we are short of time for a longer presentation, but also thank you for sharing some information, namely where to find the text of the strategy that is available, as you said, in all the languages. We will move now to the next presentation. Due to last-minute commitments, Floriana Cipal will not join us, so I give the floor to Peter Michov on behalf of the European Commission. We will present the strategy in a wider organized crime context. Peter, thank you for being with us, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the floor and also for giving the possibility to the Commission to intervene in this side event. Indeed, perhaps the first thing to say is to convey the apologies of Mrs. Cipala. Unfortunately, because of last-minute impediments, she was not able to come today. I know that she wanted to talk a little bit about the context of the EU drug strategy and perhaps also to give some news. And therefore, this is what I will try to do in the next few minutes at her place. For more than 30 years, Europe and the rest of the world have experienced significant reforms in drug policies to reduce the demand and the supply of drugs, as well as related harms. But as we just heard, we are now facing different evolutions and new patterns of consumption, increased production and new transit channels, not to mention new substances. We also continue to face a set of older issues that persist and objectives not yet entirely met. That is why there is a need to analyze the impact and consequences of our policies. The current EU drug strategy is based on a detailed assessment of the previous strategic documents and its action plans. Evaluation is an essential element for any political action at all levels. It is a barometer of effectiveness and relevance and a compass for future policy to be followed. How effective have we been in terms of prevention, reducing supply and demand for drugs, as well as reducing harms associated with problematic drug consumption? The answer to such questions have taught us that for the strategy to be effective, we need effective implementation. The evaluation in question revealed worrying and mixed results. Our lessons learned included that we need better and faster responses across the board on issues such as increased polycriminality of organized crime groups, increased levels of violence, as Marcus mentioned it, corruption that enables the drug trade, but also new patterns of drug consumption between young people and the aging population. Even though it can be said that Europe is doing rather well when we look at other regions of the world at comparable level of development, it is certain that we need to step up our efforts. We recognize the impact that drugs have on quality of life and health of so many people, and how complex and invasive the drug markets really are. That is why the current EU drug strategy is our adapted response to the drug situation and will be implemented with a focus on public health, protection of youth and of vulnerable populations, fight against stigma and discrimination, human rights, while in the same time also fighting against organized crime and money laundering within the EU and also internationally. Implementation of the strategy will also mean that we need to place more focus on alternatives to incarceration for non-violent, low-level participants in illicit drug markets. And as you know, the EU continues to firmly advocate for the worldwide abolition of the death penalty for drug-related offenses. At the same time, the illicit drug market in the EU is estimated at a minimum retail value of 30 billion euros per year. It represents a major source of income for organized crime groups in the EU. We need to make sure that law enforcement has what it needs to act decisively towards the most violent layers of organized crime and towards its corruption power and the intrusion in the legal economy through money laundering. The EU drug strategy is firm on all these aspects. However, in order to step up actions against all organized crime, the European Commission will adopt tomorrow an EU strategy to tackle organized crime. The economic crisis derived from the pandemic increases the risk of organized crime activities and the threat of organized crime infiltrating society and the economy. This new strategy to tackle organized crime responds to the increasing challenges in the organized crime landscape identified by Europol in the Serious and Organized Crime Threat Assessment, which was presented just yesterday, and sets out priority work strands and actions to tackle the modi operandi and business model of criminal networks. It is aimed at boosting law enforcement and judicial cooperation, disrupting organized crime structures and tackling high-priority crimes, eliminating the profits generated by organized crime and making law enforcement and the judiciary fit for the digital age. Given the transnational nature of organized crime groups, this new strategy sets out actions to address the internal-external security nexus. To conclude, let me say that, like organized crime networks, the world drug problem is global, calling for shared responsibility and international cooperation. On this basis, the EU will continue sharing a strong voice in the global debate on drug policy, building on decades of pragmatic and scientifically monitored efforts. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Peter, for your presentation. And it opens also the floor to our colleague Georgios, who will talk later, our colleague from Europol. But meanwhile, I will give the floor to Alexis Guzdel, the Director of the European Monitoring Center on Drugs and Drug Addiction, to elaborate on how to address the complexity of drugs in a post-COVID-19 scenario. Alexis, thank you for joining us. You have the floor.
Muito obrigado, Senor Presidente. Dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here today with you. Unfortunately, it would have been even better to be really together in the same meeting room. But some of you, we have been very active to provide support for the strategy without even seeing you, like for me and the German colleagues for the presidency, for instance. What I would like to share with you is a few reflections about how can we address the complexity of drugs in a post-COVID-19 world? What are the lessons we can learn? And of course, the publication and the launch of the SOCTA report by Europol yesterday will give even more food for thought. As we have our colleague Yorgos from Europol, I will not make use of any data, so he can have the pleasure to mention the data himself. So I would say in a few points, a few key points, few key statements, I would say what is different today from 25 years ago when the EMCDDA started its operation, and soon 30 years ago when the EMCDDA was created, is that today drugs can be everything. They can be of vegetal or synthetic origin, whether they are licit or illicit legal status. Obviously the borders, the boundaries between what is used, what is misused, what is abused have been blurred completely, have changed completely over the last 25 years. Which means that the challenge for us is to understand this change and to avoid to look at drugs, keeping in mind the image of the old junkies who were consuming mostly heroin by injection 30 years ago. Today, drugs are everywhere. What we see in Europe today, it's a hyper availability, hyper production. The EU has also become a producer of drugs. Not only drugs like MDMA, but also increasingly laboratories have been found for amphetamine, and more recently even methamphetamine with the involvement of Mexican cartels. But also the role of the EU as a producer of precursors, it's extremely important. What we also see is that increasingly the EU is becoming a transshipment area, which means that the drugs that arrive to Europe do not have necessarily Europe as the end destination. And in some cases, they go to the countries that are now the neighboring countries to the EU, and through there they go to other regions of the world. Today, drugs concern everybody. there are no boundaries anymore between user groups, and mostly because one of the major changes in the last 20 years is that we have moved from what we believed then was a single use of drugs or certain drugs to polydrug use, which means that what is to be considered as a drug, as I said before, can be exactly whatever. And let's avoid to forget this excellent definition that basically what makes the difference between a drug as a medicine, pharmacon, and as a poison, deleterio, it's the doses, most and more than the legal characterization of a substance. And today the reality is confronting us even more to this new complexity. We face also, because of this blurring of the borders and the boundaries between different kinds of substances, is the perception of the risk is being reduced. And as I said, we still have this difficulty that when we speak about addiction, the mental benchmark is the old addict model, the junkie. So most of the people who may have a problem of addiction actually do not perceive, because they say, I'm not a junkie, which is a challenge for all of us, including for decision makers. But tomorrow, drugs can be the new syndemic. And a syndemic is being defined by a conjunction or combination of various pandemics or epidemics. And here we have the increasing market pressure on substance use today, with this huge offer, unprecedented offer of substances, extremely potent, extremely pure, for a stable or decreasing price. But this can be combined with the economic recession we are facing as a consequence of COVID. There are increasing mental health problems in the population, especially among the youth. We have infectious and other infectious diseases that are still there. We see the potential for an increase in drug-related criminal activities, and we know that we should avoid that because of the economic recession. More people who are presenting some social and economic vulnerabilities may be involved more in directly or indirectly in such criminal activities. There is an increase in violence and corruption, and including related to drug production and drug trafficking. We have also increasing environmental risks. And all of this can be summarized with one example, one case study. If we look at the questions that are raised by cannabis and cannabis policy today, you will understand easily with what I present to you about the risk for a new syndemic, that the question cannot be treated only as a legal issue. There are plenty of other policy issues and questions that need to be addressed. And of course, this is not only for cannabis or about cannabis policy. The lessons from COVID is that the markets are extremely resilient. The global flows remain unchanged. The digital transformation has been boosted not only for our services and our member states, but first of all for organized criminal groups. But we have seen from COVID that there was a possibility, a potential, and a need from a different and more comprehensive response from the entire society and the role of the community. And last but not least, the growing understanding of the importance of establishing partnership with the clients of the services and not looking at people who are using drugs as a deviant social individual. The EU strategy was presented by my colleagues. I will not enter into detail, but I think we can say that that's the right tool to address those new challenges because it is evidence-based. It is based on an external evaluation, which is we are the only region in the world that is using the data collected by the MCDDA, by Europol, by the RETOX network of national focal point to build an assessment of the policy not only on declarations, but also on facts. We try to go beyond just the supply-demand divide. We have the Charter of Fundamental Rights that was mentioned by Markus Riel. We have clear priorities, and we are very conscious we need to fight against stigma. So the motto that I propose you as a conclusion for what is in front of us is do the right thing. Remember the movie of Spike Lee that shows the situation in the US during the crack cocaine pandemic? It's time for us to realize that such pandemic is not only behind, we can have it in front of us, whether it is due or associated to crack cocaine use or to methamphetamine or plenty of other substances. Therefore, we need to keep the investments at national and at European and at international level. We need to strongly support monitoring. We need to further development foresight component, and the MCDDA has been taking new initiatives in this area. Already 3 years ago, we are going to publish our first report soon. We need to have policies that are more inclusive than ever, that are human-centered, and finally, that are based on more co-production together with the users, the clients, and the beneficiaries. And I want to address special thanks to the Commission, but also in particular to the Portuguese presidency for the key work we are doing together. And we as CMCDD, we are providing all scientific and technical support to translate the EU strategy into a very efficient and a result-oriented action plan on drugs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you for your kind words and for having the EMCDDA always available to cooperate with us. And also thank you for the clues that you gave us for the future, for inspiring us in drawing the next steps towards a safer and healthier future for our communities. Thank you very much. I will now move to our colleague from Europol, Georgios Raskos, Head of Serious and Organized Crime Serious and Organized Crime Unit of Europol, who will speak about targeting high-risk drug-related organized crime groups. Georgios, thank you for joining us. You have the floor.
It's a great pleasure, Mr. Chairman, dear panelists, dear participants in this side event. As the Chairman introduced, my name is Georgios Raskos, and I'm the head of the EU Organized Crime Unit in the Serious and Organized Crime Center at Europol. My input will be focusing on the security and the supply aspect, and I will share with you Europol views vis-à-vis organized crime, high-risk organized crime groups engaged in drugs trafficking. As an opening statement, I would like to highlight that serious and organized crime remain a key threat to the internal security of the EU. Certain dimensions are particularly threatening and require some urgent coordinated action. And as such, drugs trafficking is forming the cornerstone of the criminal activities of the high-risk OCGs. One of the panel members mentioned SOCTA that was published yesterday. So SOCTA reveals that 40% of the criminal groups affecting EU member states are engaged in drugs trafficking. Pandemic, although affected to a large extent the social life and the way we operated before March 2020, didn't have a decreasing impact on the activities of the organized crime groups involved in drug trafficking. The EU drug market is the biggest criminal market, and it's supplied by sophisticated criminal networks that are using a variety of modi operandi, engaging in whole-scale trafficking activities as well as mid-level and retail distribution. The trade of each one of the four main commodity groups of illegal drugs dominating the European drug market, namely cannabis, cocaine, heroin, and synthetic drugs, has unique features. However, there are some very distinct characteristics that are cross-cutting, such as violence, corruption, document fraud, encryption, and the opportunities offered by the online trade environment. Especially for violence, that was something that was mentioned by the previous speakers, we see that competition between drug suppliers, particularly those operating in cocaine and cannabis trade, has intensified, resulting in an increase in the number of violent classes. A growing number of criminals uses violence more offensively nowadays, and some criminal networks involved in drug trafficking do not hesitate to target law enforcement, officials, or employ violence in public places as a planned and premeditated strategy. While underreported, corruption is widely employed by drug trafficking networks, particularly in the origin and transit countries, facilitating drug trade and guaranteeing the impunity of those involved. Document fraud in drug trafficking is present at all stages of the operations, and its use spans from registering legal business structures to gain access to logistical infrastructure, facilitation of drug shipments, or for enabling free movement of drug traffickers across the EU. The role of technology is paramount. Includes encryption technology channels, advanced technical solutions that are used as countermeasures, tracking devices for the shipments, or drone technology for countermeasures against law enforcement activities. While online trade in drugs remains limited compared to traditional offline operations, it has continued to grow over the last years and has the potential to expand further. Another very important element is that high-risk OCGs involved in drug trafficking are making extensive profits. The black market of drugs is at the levels of tens of billions, but very little of this illegal proceeds is being detected and recovered, confiscated. The Serious and Organized Crime Threat Assessment that was published yesterday is a comprehensive threat assessment of the organized crime in the EU. And among the top 12 scored threats, 3 of them refer to drugs, namely cocaine, synthetic drugs, and cannabis. Especially for cocaine, the seizures the last years are at record high, and it is believed that the European market is among the largest in the world. And also reflecting this high availability, the purity of cocaine at retail is at the highest level ever recorded in the EU. In synthetic drugs, the production, trafficking, and distribution remains a very dynamic crime area, subject to rapid change and innovation in terms of the substances, production methods, and suspects involved. While the cannabis market remains by far the largest drug market in the EU, with the majority of member states reporting that the trade in cannabis is either increasing or a stable threat for their internal security. When it comes to heroin, the market has largely remained stable over the last 4 years. Europol, in the framework of the EU Drug Strategy 2021-2025, will further develop targeting mechanisms and prioritize investigations on organized crime and networks posing the highest security risk in the EU through the high-value target selection process established by the member states with the support of Europol. We aim to enhance the confiscation of proceeds of drug crimes by ensuring that asset tracing and financial investigations are an integral part of every organized crime investigation we are supporting on drug trafficking. In cooperation with member states, also Europol will develop and enhance digital investigations targeting the encryption and other new technology-related methods that are employed by organized crime to avoid detection and hide their communications and planning coordination efforts. We are confident that the strategy will enhance sharing in real time of actionable intelligence and also prosecutable information within and between member states, Europol, and with countries and regions that are constituting a major source or transit hubs for drugs affecting the EU security environment. Having said that, I will finalize my brief input, and I will give you the floor back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for the ideas you shared with us. Time is running fast, so I pass immediately the floor to our last presenter. Last but not the least, we have Iga Kender-Jeriorska, Chair of the Working Group on EU Drugs Policies for the Civil Society Forum on Drugs, and she will talk about the involvement of civil society organizations in implementing EU drug strategy. Iga, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also for the invitation and the opportunity to speak at today's event. So contrary to my colleagues speaking before, and I hope also in a way that is complementing to that, I'm not speaking on behalf of public institutions, public bodies, but non-governmental organizations, or more broadly speaking, civil society. And indeed, my plan for my presentation was to focus on the involvement of civil society organizations in the implementation of EU drug policy, but since it is quite a complex phenomenon nowadays, I would also like to address different aspects, different challenges that civil society organizations face while attempting to implement the EU drug policy. So civil society and various organizations within it can be involved in policy making, in drug policy making on different levels, starting from international, like for example CND, to quite narrow local levels. They are also involved in different stages of policy making, of course, so from policy design and formulation through policy implementation and finally monitoring and evaluation. And for example, the Civil Society Forum on Drugs, which I represent today and which is an advisory body to the European Commission, has been involved in European Union drug policy making through monitoring and evaluation of the previous 2013-2020 drug strategy, but also providing input into the new strategy through continuous communication with the European Commission and other relevant European Union stakeholders. The research conducted by the civil society involvement in drug policy project shows that the most notable involvement of civil society organizations in drug policy in the EU is in the area of implementation of harm reduction policy. This is through, not surprisingly, services delivery, and this involvement of civil society in harm reduction implementation is perceived as high in as many as 15 EU member states as for 2019. It is important mainly because given the principles, some of the principles of harm reduction, like being low threshold or human rights, provision of the services by non-governmental organization in a way guards keeping maintaining these principles of harm reduction regardless of the current political situation in a given country. But NGOs delivering various demand of harm reduction services face certain challenges globally, also on the level of the European Union. First of these challenges can be the shrinking space of CSOs, a phenomenon that is increasingly raised by non-governmental organizations themselves, but also increasingly described in the academic literature. Secondly, in recent years, especially in certain Central Eastern European countries, we can observe so-called illiberal turn or democratic deconsolidation, which basically is related to stepping away from liberal democratic values and increasing lack of accountability and transparency in policy making. And in consequence, in certain contexts, drug policy as a policy field can be neglected altogether as compared to other policy fields, for example, energy, health, or environment. But also, especially in this context, when illiberalism prevails a little bit more, we can find also a clear conflict between these illiberal values of the current political area and inherently liberal principles of harm reduction. We can also see funding crisis of services in many countries and other political pressures that are exerted over civil society organizations. And last but not least, that also something that Alexis already mentioned, we can learn something from the global pandemic of COVID-19. In the context of civil society involvement and service delivery, harm reduction and demand reduction service delivery, this is related mainly to the disruption of functioning of services due to various lockdown measures introduced by various governments. So the main problem here, the main challenge that civil society organizations face is that drug-related services in very many contexts are not considered essential services, And as a result, due to the lockdown measures introduced in many countries, their operation was severely disrupted. The question then is what can be the role of the EU drug policy or the EU drug strategy in overcoming this kind of challenges that I've just discussed. So, of course, the EU drug policy, or more specifically drug strategy, provide the guidance for national drug policy for the member states and also beyond. Very importantly, something that was already also mentioned by Alexis, it also provides a framework for monitoring of the implementation of drug policies, and this is extremely important in the context of service delivery in the area of prevention, harm reduction, and demand reduction. The EU drug strategy and action plan can also serve as advocacy tools for civil society organizations when they negotiate with the national policymakers, for example, scaling up certain types of services or introducing new types of services in their countries. But from the point of view of civil society, I think the most important thing that the EU drug policy does and EU drug strategy does is that it provides a framework for involvement of civil society in drug policy making at various stages by ensuring sufficient operational space and adequate funding of different services. And in doing so, it creates a context or environment that enables civil society organizations to fulfill their role, and also by fulfilling their role, of course, support the European Union through the policy implementation and advocacy for implementing policies supported by the EU on the national level in the member states and beyond. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm of course more than happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Iga, for your very important remarks and for your comments. I must say that in our reality, the input that civil society has provided us in developing the adequate responses to this COVID-19 crisis has been key in the last year. And I think it's something it's going to last far beyond this context, because we really can improve a lot the development of our policies with that input and better recognizing the needs of the real people on the forefront of the problems. So thank you very much for sharing these ideas. We are moving fast. We are running a little bit out of time, even if we have not the limitation posed by other events. We must keep as far as possible within the time framework that we had. I only can see here on the Q&A 2 questions that I would address. I don't know if our colleagues can read them. The first one from Juliana Ertal Williamson is: does the new strategy address the needs for policy development for control of illicit drugs as well? As you mentioned, the example of cannabis. Maybe Marcus can reply to this. I don't see him now. I can see Marcus now. Peter, would you take this question?
Yes, I would perhaps say that with this strategy, we try to build a document which is forward-looking and which has also all the elements in place to anticipate also new developments. We are not clearly mentioning cannabis as such, and when you say that it is an illicit drug, I am not sure, I mean, that I understand the concept, but in any case, so we are not talking about cannabis in the strategy as such, because we are not singling out any of the other substances either. But clearly, we want to with this strategy to have an all-encompassing and future-proof document in front of us, which will help us to work during the next 5 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Another question from Evelyn Guevers. It's addressed to Alexis, but probably the answer can be shared also by our colleagues from Europol. How are you improving the response capacity of your agencies through coordination? Could you share any good practices and perspectives? Alexis, can you take it?
Thank you for the question. I would say it in two ways, because coordination is a word that has various meanings. Here I would like to single out two specific ways. The first is that we have a close cooperation and coordination between the Justice and Home Affairs agencies. The MCDDA 4 years ago was the chair of the network. So we regularly work together. We have meetings in where we see how we can provide also mutual support. For instance, the joint market report together with Europol, the early warning system on new psychoactive substances that involves the MCDDA, but also Europol, the European Medicine Agency, but also other agencies that are contributing to the risk assessments. And then, of course, for instance, we are currently preparing for the first time a new training program. We already had training programs together with CEPOL, but now we are considering to use the know-how and the distance learning platform of CEPOL to accelerate our digital transformation and provide new services for training to practitioners working in the area of treatment, prevention, and harm reduction. And then the second pillar that for me is extremely important is the fact that we started 3-4 years ago to associate more and to better consult the civil society, practitioners working on the field of treatment and harm reduction, but also association of people who are using drugs for the development of new services and products. One of them was the first edition of the European Guide for Health and Social Responses, and we are going to present a completely new package this year that for which we are going also to use what we call co-production. But last year, you probably have noticed that for the first time in our history, we launched a direct call through the social media to all the practitioners working on the field in the European Union, asking them what were their problems, the difficulties, the questions that were linked to the lockdown and to the COVID-19 pandemic. And within 10 days, we have designed 11 new initiatives. The first one was delivering results already after 6 weeks. And this work was done and could not have been done differently thanks to the very active participation of civil society, people from the field, people who are using drugs. So cooperation and coordination in our mind is not only between institutions or European institutions. It is with everybody, with all the partners, and the clients of the services are some of the partners that need more visibility and that have a place around the table together with us.
Thank you, Alexis. I don't know if Georgios wants to take the floor as well.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I can only echo what the director of EMCDDA mentioned, that our efforts are collective efforts, and Europol's activities do not develop in a vacuum. And it's not only with the other GHA agencies, but also with the strong support and the close cooperation with the member states, but also third countries with which Europol has an operational or a strategic cooperation agreement. I will mention as a concrete example the SOCTA, that is a lengthy process that is based on what the countries share with Europol, and it's a very extensive intelligence collection that allow us to identify what are the elements of organized crime nowadays, and it's a forward-looking process to to be able to understand the threat in the coming years. At the same time, the priorities that are identified by SOCTA are implemented through the European multidisciplinary action against criminal threats, where again, relevant agencies and member states come together, they design and they implement activities on training, on operational support, on the intelligence picture to work around this. And obviously, drug trafficking is one of the main priorities. So indeed, it's a collective effort that requires the mobilization of every possible actor that can contribute in this effort.
Thank you very much. We still have time. We have a request for oral question from Jata Daova. I think we can give her the possibility to speak.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, I'm Jata Dakoa. I'm the UNODC representative to Belgium, responsible for our cooperation with the European Union. Let me just start by thanking the Portuguese presidency and, of course, all the distinguished panelists for their informative presentations, on the various elements of the strategy and its wider contexts of organized crime, the post-COVID-19 related complexities, which we've heard about, and also the important engagement of civil society. I just wanted to take this opportunity to really add the voice of UNODC to what's been said before, and congratulate the European Union and EU member states on this new drug strategy. We very much agree with what's been said, that it is the right tool at the right time, and in particular, welcome the strong commitment to evidence-based policy in the strategy and the very strong references to the conventions, the SDGs, human rights, and actually the truly balanced nature of the document and approach between the drug supply and drug demand reduction, which is to be taken both internally and through all the EU's external actions. Also, of course, the strategy's future-oriented approach, the promotion of research, innovation, and foresight are all strongly applauded. Also, for us, what's important is the strong component on international cooperation, which has been further reinforced by the February joint communication from the European Commission and the European External Service on strengthening the EU's contribution to rules-based multilateralism. The EU drug strategy, as some of you may know, is well aligned with the pillar on addressing and countering the world drug problem of the new UNODC corporate strategy, which also follows the timeframe 2021 to 2025. UNODC very much encourages consideration within the new strategy of the UN pillars on peace, development, and human rights, but also the humanitarian nexus approach. We also, the strategy considers the drug work in the wider, broader context of EU policy priority areas on the Green Deal, the digital agenda, the new pact on migration and asylum, and the EU counter-terrorism strategy, all of course, which, have rightly been mentioned, related to the drugs work, especially when it comes to designing and implementing actions aimed at strengthening international cooperation and multilateralism. We also welcome the EU SOCTA 2021, which was published yesterday by Europol, and we very much look forward to the Commission's new strategy to fight organized crime, which will be expected tomorrow. I would like to just finally really pick up on the words of the EMCDDA director to keep up the financial investments to drug responses. We would like to see attention being given to ensuring predictable multi-annual financial support for the UN, including for multi-agency actions to counter the drug problem, including through co-funding and interagency pooled funds. We very much look forward to continuing the good cooperation that we have with the EU and member states, also within the context of Team Europe joint initiatives, and the cooperation and coordination that we already have in place with the Justice and Home Affairs agencies and other actors and partners. Thank you very much for the opportunity to intervene. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. We completely share the idea of a common work of the different institutions, and we remain very committed to cooperate with UNODC and United Nations bodies in dealing with this global problem of drugs. Well, I think we are coming to the end of this side event. We still have some questions on the chat. We'll reply to them in a written form. And I would like now to thank you all, to all the speakers, to all the participants for this very interesting discussion. I think this event has showcased the common approach to address the security and health implications of drug trafficking and drug use that the EU has been developing over the past 2 decades, and that is now reaffirmed in the EU Drug Strategy 21-25. The Council of the EU is currently, as it was already said, we are currently working in the action plan on the basis of a proposal presented by the Portuguese presidency, which will set out concrete measures to achieve the priorities identified in the strategy. This action plan will, in principle, be adopted by the EU and its member states by the end of June of 2021. In these unprecedented times that we are living, this is a moment more than ever for concerted efforts to address current problems in relation to drugs policy at national level, regional and international level. Thank you all for participating in this side event. We will now close and see in the next few days. We'll meet again in other events probably. Thank you for being with us.
Muito obrigado.
Good afternoon. Muito obrigado a todos. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Muito obrigado. Thank you very much. Bye.
Obrigado, Alexis. Thank you.